The central focus of everything we're talking about here is the authority of God's Word. We can trust it from cover to cover. The Bible gets attacked quite a bit for its creation account, for the flood account, so therefore people don't really want to hear about Jesus because that just comes out of the Bible, and you can't trust the Bible anyway because it's filled with errors and contradictions. The Genesis creation account's been disproven. There are these different versions of Bibles out there. There is extra stuff that got put in there. There are missing passages, and on and on and on. Those are all the challenges that we hear from skeptics, and we'll be addressing that a little bit in the second talk during the service. And I will give you a little bit more of my background during the service. I'm going to skip that for now. Just mention that we'll get to that at the service. But I'm going to tie this into prophecy, this first talk here. And it's really interesting in 2 Peter chapter 3. This is written almost 2,000 years ago. Peter is talking about the last days, the end times. Most of us think that we're living in those last days that the Bible describes. And Peter is specifically referring to the skeptics who are doubting the return of Christ. So Peter, 2,000 years ago, is talking about the skeptics of our day who are doubting the return of Christ. And he said that there are two main reasons why these skeptics are doubting Christ's return. Now, they're doubting Christ's return, so you'd think the two things that are keeping them from doubting Christ's return would be two very spiritually related things. That's not what Peter says. He says the two things that they deliberately overlook. King James says that they are willingly ignorant of two things, and it's not these two things here. It's these two things. They are rejecting the Genesis creation account, and they are rejecting the Genesis flood. When I first read that, it surprised me. I'm thinking, wait a minute, they're doubting Christ's return. How does this have anything to do with that? Here's how it connects. By doubting the creation account, they're doubting God's authority. They're rejecting God's authority. They don't see him as a creator of everything, that he owns everything and he gets to set the rules. They reject that. And by rejecting the flood, what was the flood? The flood was God's judgment on sin. They reject that. They don't need to be judged by God. They're good people. So they reject God's authority and his judgment. Well, what's the return of Christ? The return of Christ is another judgment, but it's going to be by fire the second time, not by water. That's why the skeptics of our day reject the return of Christ, because they don't see God's authority and they don't see his judgment at all. What's interesting, Peter said that 2,000 years ago. Today, every single secular scientist rejects the creation account and they reject the Genesis flood. Sadly, even many Christians reject the Genesis creation account and the flood. Oh, they'll say that God's the creator. Yeah, he created everything, but not the way Genesis says, because we know better now. Because we know all about the Big Bang and radiometric dating and on and on and on. So when you read God's word, you have to keep those things in mind and realize it doesn't really mean what it says. It means something different. So many Christians will do that, and we'll see that as we go throughout this talk. Again, I'm going to save some time, skip the actual passage, but sometime look at 2 Peter chapter 3. It actually is talking about the creation account and also mentioning the flood that they're rejecting. And again, that's exactly what we see going on today. So that's why I spent a lot of time talking about creation, the flood, and then the authority of Scripture. How do we know that this book was actually written by God and not just made up by a bunch of ignorant goat herders? And we'll talk about that a little bit more during the service. So this morning, we're talking about the flood here. We got to go back to the Garden of Eden where everything started. One of the first things that happened is Satan gets in the garden and says, hath God said? Did God really say? So Satan comes into the garden, he says to Eve, did God really say that you can't eat of any tree of this garden? Guess what? God didn't say that. He said you can eat of any tree in the garden except for one. So Satan misquoted God, twisted his words, and got Eve to doubt God's word. His plan has not changed at all today. He's doing the same thing. Certainly skeptics doubt the authority of God's word, but even Christians will doubt the authority of God's word. They'll kind of pick and choose, well, we can believe this, but this we know better now. We don't believe what we used to believe because we've got modern science to tell us that didn't really happen. So even Christians and other religious people doubt the authority of God's word because Satan is getting them to doubt that. And today we pretty much lost our moral compass. Things have always slowly been getting worse morally, But the wheels have fallen off now, and we're all very well aware of just how crazy things are. In fact, let me back up a second. The last that I checked, I think Facebook recognizes about 72 options for gender. If you paid me $1 million, I couldn't think of 12. But they have like 72, and I ask, what's wrong with that? And my answer is, nothing. There's nothing wrong with having 72 options for gender, unless there is a singular source against which everything is measured. Then you could say, you know what, I think I have a problem with that because God's word says he created male and female, so I don't think that that's going to work well, and you're going to see problems if you go down that road. It's not our philosophy versus someone else. Just helping them understand what did God say about whatever topic it is that they're bringing up. So by using God's word, we can then, have an opinion about things. It's not our philosophy. We're just helping people understand what God's word says. And it's interesting, Jesus said about his return, for as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Jesus said, the way it was at the time of Noah, that's kind of how it's going to be when he returns again. Well, what was it like in Noah's time? Well, we get this from Genesis 6, 5 through 8. The Lord saw that the wickedness was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it grieved him to his heart, so the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. God created everything. It was perfect. Adam and Eve messed it up with their sin. And then it got so bad that almost 1,700 years later, God said, it's just so crazy now. That's it. Time's up. I'm judging them. I'm going to wipe them out. So he sends a flood. But he graciously spared Noah and his wife, 3 sons and their wives. Unless you watched the movie Noah, then it was Noah and his wife, 3 sons and 1 wife. The movie did get something right. The guy's name was Noah. Apart from that, a lot of the stuff in the movie is just totally off, not biblical whatsoever. But it was just so bad, it was time for God's judgment. And that's what God says is going to happen at the time of Christ's return. Things are going to be so bad, that's when Christ is going to return. And I think we're starting to see things ramp up. It's getting really, really bad again today. This is just a short list of the things that are being thrown our way. They are overwhelming the system. It's not that any one of these issues is too hard to deal with. It's just too many of them. And you start to get some headway with one of them, and then the other one pops up. It's like the guy on the stage with all the plates spinning, and he's keeping them all spinning. That's what we're doing. We're running around trying to deal with all these things, and it's too much for us. The bad news is we can't fix these things. The good news is God isn't asking us to. He's not saying fix the world, make sure everything is great. He's saying proclaim the gospel, evangelize, share the gospel with those around you. And the worse things get, the easier it should be for us to share our faith with others. So, talk about rejecting the flood. Quick history lesson. I used to hate history, and now there's even more of it. But I find it fascinating because the more I studied apologetics and defending the Christian worldview, the more history came alive to me. And this was a huge turning point in history. There's 3 guys up here. The guy on the right here, Charles Darwin, you're familiar with him. People often come down very hard on Charles Darwin. They say, oh, he invented the idea of evolution and that destroyed everything. No, he did not invent the idea of evolution. It had been around for a long time. He just popularized it, and he didn't do that in a vacuum. He didn't wake up one day planning to play tennis, but it was raining out, so he said, oh, you know what, I think I'll write The Origin of Species instead. It didn't happen. There were things going on prior to him writing that book that led to him doing what he did. And 2 guys in particular are of interest, James Hutton and Charles Lyell. James Hutton is considered the father of modern geology. And this is what he said. The past history of our globe must be explained by what can be seen to be happening now. No powers are to be employed that are not natural to the globe. No action to be admitted except those of which we know the principle. What he was saying is when we look at the physical earth, Mount Everest, Grand Canyon, and all these features, we can only resort to natural processes that we see happening today to explain how those things got here. Well, what do we see today? We see wind and rain and some erosion here and there, slow processes. So he said we can only refer to these slow natural processes to explain the Grand Canyon and Mount Everest and all that. Well, if that's true, the Earth would have to be really, really old to lay down all those layers just by slow natural processes. This was a philosophical decision to do this. This was not a scientific conclusion. He just decided philosophically we want to get away from supernatural processes, catastrophic processes, just slow natural things happening over millions and millions of years. They didn't scientifically discover in millions of years. They said it's only going to be natural processes, so therefore we need millions and millions of years. And it's something called Uniformitarianism. Big word, just means uniform processes going on for a long period of time. That became the basis of geology. The year James Hutton died, Charles Lyell was born, and he piggybacked on those ideas. And he ended up writing a 3-volume series called Principles of Geology. And his goal in writing these 3 books was to free the science from Moses. Well, who's Moses? Moses is the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, including the creation account and the flood. Charles Lyell wanted to get away from Moses, away from the Bible, away from the creation account and the flood, and just stick to natural processes operating over millions of years. Well, what's interesting is that this is something Jesus himself said in John chapter 5. He said, "For if you believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if you don't believe his writings, how will you believe my words?" So Jesus is saying, if you're going to reject Moses and the creation account and the flood and all that, I'm not sure why you'd listen to anything I have to say because Moses told you all about me, but you're not believing him. Jesus took Moses very seriously. And so what happened was Charles Darwin took the first volume of these books with him on the Beagle, his famous voyage, where he started writing The Origin of Species. And Darwin concluded, if these 2 guys could explain the physical features of the Earth through natural processes operating over these newly discovered millions and millions and millions of years, maybe he, Darwin, could explain living things by natural processes over the newly discovered millions and millions and millions of years. So he writes The Origin of Species. That's how that happened. And then a lot of people within the church started compromising, thinking, well, if they've proven the Earth is old, which they didn't do anything of the sort, but they assumed, well, if they've proven this, we need to take that into account. So when we read Genesis, maybe we missed something. So they came up with the gap theory and age theory and many other ways of trying to get millions of years into something that they hadn't seen before. So that's a little bit of a history lesson there. We see it today. This is Biblical Archaeology Society. This is from a year ago, actually. They're talking about Noah and the flood, and they talk about this epic story. Now, there's really nothing wrong with using the word story. We use that, but sometimes it sounds like something's watered down, like it maybe didn't happen, it's just a story, but it's not that bad to use the word story. But then later in the article, they say, even if it didn't happen, it's a true story. Wait a minute, how does that work? Even if it didn't happen, and they're hinting at the idea that, yeah, maybe there really wasn't a flood. And then later, they talk about the Genesis tale. Now they've really watered it down. It didn't actually happen. It's just a tale in the Bible. And at the end, they say this, although the great flood may have not happened exactly as Genesis relates it, that doesn't mean it's not a true story in some sense. It didn't happen, but it's still a true story in some sense. It doesn't make any sense. But again, they've watered down their view of God's word, that they know better now, it doesn't really mean what it says. And even William Lane Craig, some of you may be familiar with him. He's one of the leading Christian apologists, and he does a great job debating atheists and other skeptics. I've heard him many times. Brilliant guy. But here's just one example where my personal opinion is he is compromising on his view of the authority of God's word. And I'm not trying to disparage him specifically. This is just one example, and there are many other Christian leaders who have views that are like this, and this is what he said. Take, for example, the attempt to explain away Earth's sedimentation on the basis of the so-called flood geology, Noah's flood. The idea that there was ever a worldwide flood that destroyed all terrestrial life on Earth and laid down Earth's sediments is a fantasy. I was so disappointed when I read that, thinking, no, don't do that. But because he's just taking for granted what the secular geologists believe and astronomers and all that, and he uses that as a filter to figure out what God really meant, you come up with conclusions like this, which I think is very unfortunate and very, very dangerous. So I'm going to fast forward through some of this, but if you read through Genesis 6 through 8, a description of the flood, you will see very strongly this is a worldwide, global, catastrophic event. And I'm just going to highlight some words here. We're going to focus on the words in green. Genesis 6:17 talks about destroying all flesh, uses the word everything. All the fountains of the great deep were broken up. That's how the flood started. It rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed. It increased greatly on the earth. The waters prevailed. All the high mountains over the whole heavens were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. That's about 22 and a half feet. And in the Hebrew, we don't have time, but the Hebrew here, this is like a double imperative. It's so strong. All the high hills under the whole heaven. This is a global event. All flesh died, all swarming creatures, all mankind, everything, every living thing, only Noah, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. It just goes on and on. This is a global event, so why would I say local flood? Because many religious people, even many Christians, say, yes, there was a flood, but it was just a local event. Why would they say that? Because they're listening to everything the secular geologists say. The secular geologists don't believe in a global flood, so we as Christians can't either. We'll have to reread Genesis and come up with a different interpretation. So they say it was just a local flood in Noah's area. I'm going to give you, I think 7 or 5, I can't remember if I shortened this one, a number of reasons why there's no way that this was a local flood. Number 1, if it was a local flood, why would Noah spend so many years building an ark? God could have said, Noah, here's a number of a good realtor, move. I'm going to flood this area. He would have had plenty of years to move his family, but if it was a global flood, he would need to build an ark. And why such a massive ark? About 2 million cubic feet of storage space. Local flood, you could have built a smaller ship to put local animals on it. It would have been fine. If it was a global flood, you would need a much bigger ark to put 2 of each kind. The Bible doesn't say species. 2 of each kind of animal on the ark. Had to be global. Birds, why put birds on the ark? Local flood, they would have flown away and been fine. If it was a global flood, they would need somewhere to live for the year of the flood. Reason number 4, it says all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. You cannot cover all the high hills in a local area. Water seeks its own level. You can't do it that way. 5thly, did God break his promise? We have the rainbow. What is a rainbow biblically a symbol of? God's promise that he wouldn't send a flood again. Genesis chapter 9, neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. If it was just a local flood in Noah's time, God lied, because we have had thousands of floods since then where hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives. So if it was a local flood, God said he'd never do that again, then he lied, because we've seen many of those floods. Number 6, local floods don't last 370 days. You look at the chronology in the Bible, that's how long the flood lasted. Local floods don't last that long. And lastly, the Bible says it took 73 days for the floodwaters to recede. It doesn't take that long for local floods to recede. The ark landed in the mountains of Ararat. It doesn't say on Mount Ararat. It says in the mountains of Ararat. This is greater and lesser Mount Ararat there, a couple mountains. So anyway, it doesn't take that long for local floods to recede. It was a global flood. And that's what we've believed, through most of history until the secular geologists told us we can't do that. So a lot of Christians have compromised that, okay, we can do a local flood because you can interpret the Bible to mean anything you want, right? So let's take a look at the evidence, because a lot of people say, I don't care what the Bible says. There is no scientific evidence there was a global flood. That's a crazy idea. Okay? Let's take a look at some actual scientific evidence that there was a worldwide flood. I'm going to cover, 6, 7, or 8 of these really quick. I have a series on the flood. It's a 4-part series. I'm giving you portions of it, so we're going to go through these kind of quickly. First one, we have marine fossils on top of mountains. How do you get sea creatures fossilized on top of mountains? On top of Mount Everest, 5.5 miles high. It's in the Himalayas. How do you get sea creatures up there unless the mountains were actually lower in the past, covered with ocean waters? That means sediments were buried and sea creatures were being buried, and at the end of the flood, Psalm 104, God caused those mountains to rise up catastrophically. So those sediments, those sea creatures are being pushed up, and that's what we see now. And there's a lot of evidence for that. We've got crinoids and ammonites fossilized in every mountain system all over the planet. Secondly, rapid burial of plants and animals. How do you get a fossil? The only way you can get a fossil is to bury something rapidly. If a cow dies in the field today, animals will eat the meat, and then you got the bones laying around, and the bones will disintegrate. It won't turn into a fossil. Now, if it got buried by a local landslide, it could get preserved from the oxygen in our atmosphere, and it could fossilize. But you have to bury it rapidly. Well, the fact that all these sedimentary layers over the planet are filled with billions and billions of fossils tells us those layers were laid down very rapidly. But here's the standard story of fossilization. Actually, we're going to talk about fossilizing a dinosaur. I did a dinosaur excavation 2 summers ago out in western Colorado. It was pretty cool. We were close to a place called Dinosaur, Colorado. I'd never even heard of it, but I saw the sign and I was like, I got to drive through there so I could say I was there. And there was a church there called Dinosaur Bible Fellowship. How cool is that? It's like, I'm sure there's a lot of kids at that church. That would be a fun one to attend. So, and I was also close to Dinosaur National Monument. That's actually in Utah, right across the border. So I drove over there really quick. There's 1,500 dinosaur bones in the side of a cliff. And they put the museum here. So there's me at the museum. These bones are just all over the place. You can actually walk up to them and touch them. They're very, very well preserved. 1,500. What people don't know, there's actually more clam fossils here than there are dinosaur bones. Those are sea creatures. How do they get buried with all the dinosaurs? So I was digging up a Camarasaurus. I think it was a femur from a Camarasaurus. This is what a Camarasaurus looks like. 66 feet long, 44,000 pounds. If I were to stand next to it, that would be me for scale, a huge dinosaur. Why were we digging up dinosaur bones? We were looking for red blood cells and soft tissue. This is part of another talk that I give. We are told dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. Nice story. If that's true, all the bones should be fossilized, and they shouldn't have any soft tissue or red blood cells. Guess what? We're seeing soft tissue and red blood cells in dinosaur bones over and over and over now. There's a lot of details behind that. They discovered it back in 1995. That's not yesterday. That's 1995. Why haven't you been hearing about it? Because they can't explain it. It shouldn't be there. After they first accidentally discovered it, they started looking for it more, and we're finding it all over. We're finding it in bones they're telling us are over 200 million years old. I actually have a video in one of my other talks where you can see the scientists stretching the material and it's snapping back. 65 million years old and it's still fresh. We even have DNA fragments now in dinosaur bones. So the ones we dug up, they were sent over to the University of Liverpool in the United Kingdom. I'm going to be over in the United Kingdom speaking in August. But anyway, creationists are doing our own research. We have our own materials to work directly on, and we're publishing things along those lines. It's fascinating, but it's part of another talk. But the standard story of fossilization is this. Dinosaur dies in some riverbed, and the river's bringing in sediments to bury it, so it brings more and more sediments, slowly burying it. More and more layers there. Sometimes the layers are uplifted a little bit, and then you have more erosion going on, exposing the bones, and then we dig them up. That's a nice story. It's impossible. If it was laying in a riverbed like that, it would decay and dissolve away very quickly. It would never get fossilized. It would have to be buried under those layers very rapidly, not slowly over time, which is the standard story. Here's a fish that was buried so rapidly it didn't have time to digest its lunch. Fish inside another one. Here's a fish that got buried in process of eating. That's how rapid, and you can see the beautiful preservation of these things too. If they were laying around on a riverbed for a while, all that would have dissolved away. You wouldn't see the intricate details that we see. Third line of evidence, rapid or no erosion in between the layers. So we're kind of concluding already that the layers themselves must have been laid down rapidly, And now we're seeing like basically no real amount of time went by in between the layers. And this is very, very significant. This is my son and I. I do Grand Canyon tours. I think I have some slides in one of my presentations about it. But one time I was asked by a group down there to come down, give them some lectures, and then actually hike all the way down to the bottom and back up. On our tours, we take a bus and we go up to the rim, walk along the rim, super easy. We take a bus down to the river and we raft around the river. But this particular trip, we were hiking all the way down in February. This is actually 2 years ago, and higher up on the trail was completely covered with snow and ice. You had spikes on your boots, and then you have to be able to wear layers because it gets warmer as you go down. But so we were hiking in the canyon, and you can see the path we were taking, down this way, all the way. It just keeps going. It takes 6 hours all the way down here. This is for scale. There's some people there. It's just massive. So as you go down, our goal was to get to the very bottom, a mile vertically down to Phantom Ranch in the inner gorge. But as we were hiking down, we go past all these layers. This is a cutout of the Grand Canyon. You've seen pictures of that before. So as we're hiking, we're going down past all these layers, and there's 2 layers in particular I'll draw your attention to, the Coconino Sandstone and the Hermit Shale. I will show you a picture of those layers here. So here I am standing next to these layers, and you can see the color difference. So this is a Coconino Sandstone, Hermit Shale. They used to tell us that each of these layers was laid down slowly over hundreds of millions of years and all that. Well, because of the fossils, they realized, okay, they were laid down quickly. So now what they say is that, yeah, this was laid down pretty rapidly, the Hermit Shale, and then it sat there for 10 million years. And then the Coconino Sandstone was laid down. So they say there's supposedly 10 million years of Earth history in between these 2 layers. This is like a razor edge, like a mason took a trowel and just smoothed it straight across. There's no way that this layer sat exposed for 10 million years of Earth history with no erosion in it, no soil developing, no plants growing, no bioturbation, that's animals burrowing up and down. It's just straight across. This is one layer being deposited rapidly after another. This is from last summer. I was down there again, the same place, a little nicer when it's warm out. There's 2 other layers I'll draw your attention to. The red wall limestone and the Muav limestone. They're supposedly 160 million years of Earth history with no evidence whatsoever. They have to put the time somewhere, so they're trying to squeeze it in between the layers. Worse than that, at the bottom, we have 1 billion years missing. It's not there, and there's no evidence. They call this the Great Unconformity. The layers below don't conform with the layers above. This is Vishnu schist with some Zoroastrian granite in there, but this is basically basement rocks of the Earth, original creation rocks, and then they say something happened here to just tear all that up catastrophically, and then you have all these sedimentary layers above it. They call it the Great Unconformity because we see this layer all over the planet. Something globally happened. And so here's the Grand Canyon. This blue layer, that's the Tapete Sandstone. It's the first layer of sediments that are laid down in the Grand Canyon. Below it, these are the original creation rocks. That's the Vishnu schist. Now, I travel around the country, but I'm from Wisconsin, and so when I'm talking to groups in Wisconsin, I ask them, have any of you been to Devil's Lake? And most people raise their hands. It's a really, really beautiful area in Wisconsin. So here's a picture of the lake, cool rock formation. They call this Devil's Doorway. But here's me standing next to some boring-looking rocks. And when I was younger, I walked by these rocks a lot and thought, they're just rocks, who cares? Now I think they're really cool, and here's why. So back to the Grand Canyon. So that's, again, the separation between original creation rocks and where the flood started. Well, this line here is the same line right here in Wisconsin. You could walk right up to it. This is original creation rock. Here's the Great Unconformity, and then above it you've got the conglomerates. So this is what they call up there, they call it Baraboo Quartzite, and then you've got some Baraboo Quartzite boulders that were broken up from here, and then in between they call it Jordan Sandstone. But geologists know something major happened here to rip up that solid rock. Well, that matches up with the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and we see this type of a scenario all over the planet. It's pretty cool to see. And again, they say there's 1 billion years of Earth history in between those layers, even though there's no evidence of 1 billion years going by. So again, another visual for this. They used to tell us that all these layers in the earth were accumulated over hundreds of millions of years by slow natural processes, wind, rain, a few local storms. But they realized there's a problem with that because these layers have fossils in them, so they must have been laid down rapidly. So, like I mentioned, all the time of Earth history, hundreds of millions of years are in between the layers. Very clever. But here's a problem with that again. Let's say this layer here was laid down pretty rapidly a long time ago, and then it sat there for millions of years. Well, you would see then this erosion in it. And then the next layer would come very rapidly and fill all that in, and if that sat there a long time, you'd see erosion in that, sometimes very significant erosion. And then that would get filled in, and if that sat there for a long time, then you'd see erosion on the top of that. So the point is the context between these layers would kind of be all over the place if their story is true. What do we actually see? We see pancakes. Shouldn't show this in the morning. We see layers that just go straight across. This is Painter Desert in Arizona, just straight across, pancakes. There's no erosion in between these layers. Here's another set of layers. Here's the Grand Canyon. This is that Coconino sandstone there, and all the layers like pancakes. Okay, these layers don't count, and the reason is there's no chocolate. See, it's not dessert if it doesn't have chocolate in it. It's just a waste of calories. It says that in the Bible somewhere in the back, I think. But anyway, more ideas with the layers. Here's evidence these layers were not laid down over hundreds of millions of years. We have something called polystrate fossils. These are fossils that go up through multiple layers. These are fossils of trees. So here's the story. Let's say this layer down here was laid down 200 million years ago, and then this tree started growing in that layer. And then it apparently stood there for millions of years as it's waiting for those other layers to eventually bury it. It's physically impossible. This tree would have rotted away long before those other layers got there. And take a look at the bottoms of these trees. They're missing something. We like to call them root systems. These trees were not growing here. They were growing somewhere else, catastrophically torn away from their root systems and rapidly redeposited here in a single event like a global flood. Sometimes we see these trees laying sideways. They weren't growing there. Sometimes they were upside down. Here's an actual photograph of a polystrate fossil tree going up through multiple layers, and we see these things all over the planet. Fourth line of evidence, greatly folded rock layers. I don't know if you've ever tried to fold a rock before. Don't waste your time. Even if you were strong enough, the layers would just shatter. But we see folded rocks around the planet with no shattering in them. This is over in England. My wife and I had gone over there. I'm going back for the third time in August. I think she's coming with me. For scale, these are some people up there. You can see how big these folds are. I'm going to zoom in real quick on these folds. These are greatly folded rock layers, but there's no shattering in them. These layers were not laid down slowly over hundreds of millions of years. They were laid down catastrophically, and as they were still soft, plates of the earth are moving, and they're getting folded up, and then they harden afterwards. Here's more layers from Bavaria, Germany, greatly contorted layers all over the place. These things were not laid down over hundreds of millions of years. They were laid down catastrophically. Cornwall, England, look at these folds. It's just crazy. And again, no shattering in these layers. Fifth line of evidence, the number of canyons around the planet. A number of years ago, Bill Nye, the science guy, was debating Ken Ham about creation and evolution, and Bill Nye said this: if this great flood drained through the Grand Canyon, wouldn't there have been a Grand Canyon on every continent? How could we not have Grand Canyons everywhere if this water drained away in this extraordinarily short amount of time? That's actually a really good question. If we had a global flood, how come we just have the Grand Canyon here for us to enjoy and we don't have canyons all over the planet? Guess what? We have canyons all over the planet. Bill Nye didn't know anything about that. Here's an example. In the Himalayas, where Mount Everest is, we have this canyon here. It is 3.3 miles deep, 308 miles long. That's over 3 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. And about the same length, the Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, so about the same length, but 3 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. And if you compare the basin area, the space it takes up, that canyon would take up the space equivalent to Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona combined. Here's a map of the Grand Canyon. If we put that where it belongs, That's the Grand Canyon compared to the basin area of that other canyon, and that one's much, much bigger. And then we have one in Namibia, Africa, and one in South Africa, and one in Tibet, China, and one in New South Wales, Australia, and in Taiwan, and in Peru, and in Romania, and then we have a big one in Mexico, and then we have a few more, and then we have a few more. There's like 300 canyons all over the planet. And if that wasn't enough already, don't you think it should be? I'll throw in another one for free if you act now. Greenland, 2013. Some of you were alive back in 2013, right? Wasn't that long ago. They just discovered, oh, we never saw this one because it was under the ice. Ground penetrating radar revealed this canyon here, which is 460 miles long. That's much longer than the Grand Canyon and 2,600 feet deep. Oh, never noticed that one until recently. Wait a minute, I thought we discovered everything in science we could many, many years ago. And then for free, one other one, the deepest canyon discovered in Antarctic Glacier in 2019. That's pretty recent. Well, never saw that one either because it was in Antarctic, and the ice, it reaches 2.2 miles below sea level. It starts much higher, so it's actually deeper overall, or it goes deeper below sea level than any other canyon, but oh, never noticed that one. There are canyons all over the planet because there was a global flood. I'm going to end with this, the power of moving water. Water can do a lot of damage in a short period of time. I'm going to very quickly go through 4 examples, and then we'll end the Sunday school session. Burlingame Canyon, Glen Canyon Dam, Missoula flood, and Mount St. Helens. Burlingame Canyon in Washington State. In 1926, some farmers were doing some irrigation, and they were having some problems with the water, so they had to temporarily reroute the water into the drainage ditch here, which is about 6 feet wide, some spots that went to 10 feet deep. So just temporarily reroute the water there as they're doing something else. Well, watch what this thing turned into. It turned into this, 1,500 feet long, 120 feet deep, 120 feet wide. Can you imagine rerouting this drainage ditch and 6 years later you see that? Oh, it wasn't 6 years later. 6 days. This was carved out in 6 days. Anyone else walking up to this would think, well, hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years of Earth history. No, 6 days. So don't leave the hose running in your backyard very long, because it can do a lot of damage in a short period of time. Glen Canyon Dam, which is where we get on the river when we do our rafting for our Grand Canyon trips. So here's Glen Canyon Dam. This is northern Arizona and then Utah up here. This is where the dam is. That's where we get on our river part of rafting. So here's Glen Canyon Dam. We actually start rafting right here. And then behind the dam here is Lake Powell. So now we take a side angle here and then another angle. What's interesting is in the area when it rains out, every inch of rain in the area equates to a 12-foot rise in the water here because it collects it all and it goes into the lake, so it rises. You don't want the water going over the top of the dam. That would do a lot of damage. So they have to fight against that. Well, in 1983, there was a lot of spring melt and the water was coming up really close to the top and it was going to go over. So they had to do something. First they put up plywood and all that. That wasn't enough. So they opened up outlet tubes that are built in. Down at the bottom they have these outlet tubes specifically to open up to let water drain around the dam and not go over the top. This is actually the ramp we walk down to get on our rafts to go on the tour. It's kind of cool. So here's the outlet tubes open up. They release 17,000 cubic feet of water every second. So they opened that up. That wasn't enough. So they had to open up spillways. So they had a much larger spillway that releases 32,000 cubic feet of water per second. That's equivalent to 3,000 bathtubs of water every second. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying bathtubs were flying out of here. But just in a few minutes, in fact, to back up, they opened it up, and within a few minutes, they felt the ground start to shake. And they saw stuff flying, big chunks flying out of the water. And the water was discolored greatly, so they had to shut off the spillway quick. And when they went inside, they found this. It had carved a hole 32 feet deep, 40 feet wide, and 150 feet long. this whole thing. So here's part of the outlet tube, and then all this is gouged out through 3-foot thick rebar reinforced concrete and solid rock. Water flowing through a tube that was designed to have water flow through it did all that damage in probably minutes because of something called cavitation. I don't have time to go into the physics behind this, but it's basically where bubbles form and then they don't explode, they implode, they collapse on themselves, and the shock waves do all the damage. You know, with propellers on submarines and all that, they have to worry about cavitation, but I'm going to skip some of those details here and end with this. More damage in a short period of time. Mount St. Helens, I just did a tour last August of Mount St. Helens. It was the 41st anniversary of its eruption. We wanted to do it on its 40th anniversary, but COVID's stopped that. But here are a little bit of highlights, and many of you remember Mount St. Helens erupting in 1980. So in 1980, a volcano erupted violently for 9 hours. An earthquake registering 5.1 on the Richter scale triggered the initial steam blast. There was a landslide that released some steam out. The steam blast was 550 degrees Fahrenheit, went 150 miles an hour, and it was equivalent to 20 million tons of TNT or dynamite. It threw out rocks the size of cars and city blocks. This is just an initial steam blast before the rest of the eruption went. 150 square miles of forest were leveled in 6 minutes. This is the steam blast, not the lava and all that coming out. Steam blast leveled that much lumber. This is equivalent to 640,000 three-bedroom homes being leveled in 6 minutes. I did another calculation. That's basically 1,700 homes being wiped out every second by a steam blast. A lot of damage going on. These were the trees that were knocked down by the steam blast, and also then some debris went into the local Spirit Lake, and that water was pushed up onto land and knocked trees down and washed a lot of it back to the lake. But this was knocked down from the steam blast. Over the entire episode is equivalent to 400 million tons of TNT. That's 20,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. That's one atomic bomb going off every second during this episode for Mount St. Helens. It produced a wave 186 feet high. So the debris goes into the lake, it pushes all the water up 186 feet high onto the land. The trees had been knocked down, and then it washed a lot of those trees back into the lake. This is the day after. There were 1 million logs floating in the lake. So these are actually logs. You could walk across that lake because of all those logs there. This is me in August with the blown out cone here in the back. This is Spirit Lake. There's still 500,000 logs floating there. There's a closer picture of all these logs from 41 years ago. I climbed up one of the mountains, and you can see over here, those are the 500,000 logs. The wind blows them down to the end of the lake there. So this is 2 years later now. There was a little bit of a burp, and it caused a mud flow out of the cone. Let me back up here again. It caused a mud flow that came out of that cone, and it formed a 1/40th scale Grand Canyon in 1 day. A little bit of mud coming out of that cone. We'll get back to that. The volcanoes that formed much of Yellowstone were probably 2,000 times as powerful as Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is like a small to medium-sized volcano. So here's the little Grand Canyon that was carved by a mud flow in solid rock in 1 day. It actually did a series of canyons. These are the canyons that were carved by a mud flow, a small mud flow through solid rock. Does that look much different than the Grand Canyon? Here's the Grand Canyon. Looks pretty similar. Let's go back to Mount St. Helens. Again, not that much of a difference. Let's put them side by side. Look pretty similar. If this happened by a little mud in a day, why does this have to be the Colorado River over millions and millions of years carving? No. Can you imagine a worldwide flood? That could do that piece of cake. No problem at all. We saw this is real science. We saw it happen in 1 day. So why do we tell stories about a Colorado River carving out 900 cubic miles of sediment over millions of years? There's a lot of reasons why that doesn't work at all. Closing with this. We're talking about a lot of science and the flood, and a lot of people say, okay, yeah, there was a flood, who cares? This is why it matters. And this is something that comes as a surprise to many Christians. They haven't connected the dots. This is huge. In my mind, I'm telling you my opinion right now, it doesn't have to do with the flood. It doesn't even directly have to do with the age of the earth. It has to do with the idea of death. How so? It has to do with the question of where did death come from? When did it come into God's creation? And everyone here this morning has a question to answer. You have to answer this for yourself. You don't need to walk out with my opinion. You need to answer this question personally, yourself, before God as you walk out today. And it has to do with the Garden of Eden. We go back there again. We know for a fact that there are many layers in the earth. We've been talking about that for a long time. We know these layers are filled with billions of fossils. That's just a fact. We call it the fossil record. Nobody argues it. Atheists do not argue with that. Layers, fossils, fossil record. We also know that fossils represent death, disease, pain, and suffering. They're creatures that were living that died and got buried. So that's a fact. Nobody argues that point whatsoever. The question comes in, how did that happen? How did we get a bunch of layers filled with dead things? How did that happen? If you as a Christian believe, well, it was natural history, we got all these geologic things happening over hundreds of millions of years, and that's just the process God used because God's all powerful. He can do anything he wants. He can do a Big Bang, and then he can do earth history and all that. Doesn't matter. We're just here to worship Jesus. Okay? Well, if you believe it was just hundreds of millions of years of natural history, laying layers down slowly and burying all those things, that makes God responsible, because then after that all is all done, then God plants the garden up there and puts Adam and Eve in it. And they're saying, oh, this is such a perfect world. This is paradise. No, you are living on top of a graveyard filled with billions of dead things and death and disease and suffering. We even have evidence of cancer in dinosaur bones. So when Adam and Eve sinned, that didn't bring death into God's world. It had been around here for hundreds of millions of years. It's not their fault that death is here. That's part of God's creative process. So that makes God responsible for death, disease, pain, and suffering. If, on the other hand, you think that all these layers were laid down during the global flood, that makes man responsible. God created everything, and Adam and Eve sinned. Romans 5:12 says it was by Adam's sin that brought death in the world. That means God's original creation was perfect. Adam and Eve sinned, and that brings death and corruption into God's world. And then things just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So about 1,700 years later, God said, that's it. I'm sending a flood. I'm wiping them out. And all those layers get catastrophically laid down, burying things that were alive after Adam and Eve sinned. So is this really just a snapshot of God's process of creation? It's just kind of how he chose to do it. Or is this really a graphic picture of God's judgment on sin leading to the necessity of Jesus Christ dying on a cross? If we're not responsible for death in the world, it seems like Jesus wasted his time being tortured and crucified if it's not our fault that death is here. But if it is our fault, we are so thankful that Jesus would come and pay our penalty for our sins. You have to answer that. It's not about the age of the earth, but what you believe about this will determine what you have to believe about the age of the earth. If you believe everything is millions of years old, then all this happened before Adam and Eve sinned. And you'll have to figure out, does Scripture support that? And you'll have to give an account to God. Versus, the other view that this is all a picture of God's judgment on mankind's sin. So it really comes down to the ultimate authority. Do we really, really believe what this says? Or do we go somewhere else and gather all this knowledge from the secular scientists and then tell God what he really meant? That's kind of dangerous when we do that. And for most of history, we didn't even have science. So what were they supposed to do in the past? Read it, but it doesn't really mean that. But now today we have scientists who can tell us what God really meant. Or maybe God says what he means and means what he says. So with that, Psalm 119 says, thy word is true from the beginning. Genesis is the beginning of God's word. If we can't trust God for what he says about the beginning, how can we trust him for anything else? So it's really about the authority of God's word. It's not really so much about the details of creation account or the flood and all that. It's about
Good morning. I pray that you all have enjoyed so far. What a blessing. What information, good information for us. Amen? Amen. Let's look at our prayer list and let's pray. God's answering prayer. We want to pray first of all, for our salvation prayer request for Aunt Shirley, Myron's aunt. The Pickerel family, the Hawken family, Tim Towson, also Matthew Knight, Erica and Isabella, Garnett Anderson, Cheryl and Angelo Farrar, Christina Crown, good to see her here today. Are you doing okay? Wonderful. By the way, the newlyweds, right here, live. That was a lot of fun. All right. Also, Michael Turley, praying for him, Chloe Saul and her baby, Ken and Lorraine Mahan, Ella Mason, and Evan Mason. Also for Fred Miller. Also want to mention that Shale Henson, a lot of you remember him, exciting young preacher, will be here on the 3rd of April. We're looking forward to that. Fred Miller, we're praying for Fred, for Betty Stepp, the Malberg family. Andy, your son-in-law's name is? I'm sorry? Jonathan Youngston. Praying for him with some physical problems. Also Butch Lysinger, Tommy Harrison family, Sherry Greenhow. Jim Bowie, recuperating from foot surgery, praying for him. Kimberly Harris, Jim Heath, Paul Fitchner, also Zoe, Linda Mendora, good to see her here today. Ashley Enstrom and her son. Kristen Stockman, also Aiden Sweeney, Jerry and Linda Muchow, also Joey and Mary, Josh Bozeman, Antonio Lyle, praying for him. Also for Anita Baldo's mom, who is here today. And good to have Rita here. And we're thankful for the family that had come. And Anita went home to be with the Lord, and we had her funeral yesterday. And I'm sure she's up in heaven having a good time today, back with her husband. Can I get an amen? Amen. Good to have. Please be sure to see Rita. Raise your hand, Rita, so people know who you are. So be sure to say hello afterward. Also for Maddie Anderson, Kim Ferguson, good to see her. Looking great, doing good. Also Joan Hall's son David, praying for him. Also for Larissa, the Kacheski family. Donna Harris, my wife, going into surgery on March 14th. Her sister Dory is going, she's going to have surgery when, Donna? The 7th, okay. Also Debbie Boer, praying for her. Ginger and A.J. Konigan and family. Harry and Roxanne Berger, also for Mike Winston. Also for Dale Hayes. Charles and the Newman family, David Proctor, also Rose Younger. Is she here today? I don't think I see her. Okay. Valerie, good to see Valerie here. Aroko Nod, praying for her. Pammy Byer, also Robert Cole. Myron Greenhow. It looks like he's doing pretty good. I see him in the back. Also Brandon Baldwin. Paul Mattingly, amazingly doing well with his operation, and for his daughter Shanna, doing well. Nancy Willis, back home, looking good. Also Joseph Kelly and family. Mary Jo Thompson. Marissa Crown, praying for her today. Also for Lakeland Draheim, Denise McElwee, and again our condolences for the family of Anita, and also for Laura, the family of Laura Bowie. And Lord, we also pray right now for Mark and Anita's children that are in the military, Ashley Baldo in the Air Force, and Anita Baldo in the Army. They were here yesterday. We pray for them, and Lord, we pray, oh God, for our country, America, and for those that are, and from our military, we pray you give them wisdom on what's going on in the Far East there, and Lord, we do pray for the families of those that are being attacked. Please, Lord, intervene and do something great. Protect them. And we love you, Lord Jesus. And we ask all these things in your precious holy name. Amen. Amen. Right? Also want to mention real quick, I want to say thank you, Jay. What an informative Sunday school. Amen.
Amen.
And what a joy to see him use the Word of God and speak to us.
Thank you, Pastor Marvin. Please stand with us as we continue to worship the Lord this time. He is Lord, Lord of all, Lord of all. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you, Lord, for encouraging us. Hold on to your blessed truth in the Bible, and we thank you, God, that you have created this world, and through the fall of man and sin, you have sent our Savior Jesus Christ to redeem us. Thank you for that blessed hope, Lord, your power and your holiness and your righteousness. We lift up the name of Jesus Christ. We lift you up today, Lord, in our midst. And we ask that the Holy Spirit would continue to move in our midst. Anoint our speaker today. Continue to encourage us in your word, Lord, and fill us with your Holy Spirit and renew our strength and our faith today. For this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. When he shall come, Lord, Lord of all, Lord of all. Amen. Thank you. Please be seated.
Ray, guess what? Tuesday, sprung. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to fellowship. And as you heard me remind Ray, that spring will have sprung on Tuesday. Whew, we made it. It's good to have you all here today. Just have a few announcements. As always, our pastor and Bill have our Bible study on Wednesday evening, and we're all encouraged to be here, and it's a good time of fellowship as well. We have a lot going on right now, so we're glad for that. We have a special speaker here today. Welcome. And Bill will tell you more about that in a few moments. If you have any prayer requests, we ask you to jot them down, and you can drop them in the offering plate, give them to the pastor or to Donna. Pray for our country, our men and women that serve in the military, police, fire, EMS, medical, and any other field, in all fields, as hopefully we're winding down this pandemic for our next booster shot, which whoever knows what that'll be for. But anyway, we've had a lot of them over the years, but we'll just have to see what goes from there. Well, I just have this story today about a gentleman that was from Kansas, and he decided he wanted to write a book about churches around the country. He started flying all over the country, and he went into this very large church. As he was in the church, he began taking photographs, making notes, spotted a golden telephone on the vestibule wall, and intrigued with the sign which read, "Calls, $10,000 a minute." Seeking out the pastor, he asked about the phone and the sign. The pastor answered, "This golden phone is in fact a direct line heaven, and if he pays the price,
You can talk to God directly. The man thanked the pastor and continued. As he visited churches throughout the United States, he found more and more of the same phones, golden phones, $10,000 a minute. Wow. So he gets to Tennessee, and he's jotted all of this down, and he noticed the same phone hanging on the wall. However, 35 cents. Intrigued by the fact that such a reduction in the price of these calls, he asked the pastor, he says, what's the deal? I've been everywhere else, and it's been $10,000 for one of these. The pastor looked at him with a big smile on his face, and he says, son, you're in God's country. It's a local call. Thank you very much. At this time, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Mike, for that appropriate joke. We will continue. Those that missed Sunday school, you can look at it on YouTube, and we're going to continue. I originally said food and fellowship or finger food, because I was going to bring a few things which are on the table back there, healthy or snack bars. But also the call went out for the church to bring something, and it really surprised me. It shows the love and care and that we're one in Christ. There's going to be a feast and fellowship back in the normal room. So may we be blessed as we hear the words from in this special area about the Bible and science, as Jay Seegert from the Beginning Point, the Starting Point Project will speak with us. Jay?
Well, good morning. If you weren't here for Sunday school, I'm going to stand up here so I can see what I'm telling you. I'm going to give my background in just a second. I was introduced as a special speaker. She calls me special, but she doesn't mean anything good by it. So, but I'm thankful to be here. We're going to be covering some interesting topics, and as I mentioned during Sunday school, it's really all about the authority of God's Word, that we can trust it from cover to cover, because today, sure, that's fine. Thank you. Today, the Bible is attacked probably more than ever, and a lot of Christians aren't sure how to defend their faith. They struggle with that, and they even wonder, can they trust the Bible? Especially with science, it seems like science has disproved so much, and you just have to somehow grit your teeth and decide to believe it anyway, in spite of what we learn from science. Well, the truth is, it's really the opposite. The more we look at science, the more we realize we can trust everything that we see in God's Word. Hopefully we'll have my PowerPoint up here in a second. There we go. We're going to be talking about Christianity, logic, and science. I put this custom talk together a while ago as kind of an outreach, because I was telling people, I'm not asking you, there were a lot of visitors. I said, I'm not asking you to just come here and just believe it, just feel it in your heart. I said, there's nothing wrong with emotions. In fact, in 1984, I actually had an emotion, and it's kind of scary, but I got through it. My wife says that's not too far from the truth. Anyway, no, there's nothing wrong with the emotions, but I really want you to think through things today. Don't just feel it and blindly believe it. I want you to really think through things. So we're going to be looking at Christianity from the most basic, logical, scientific angle that we can. Since most of you don't know me from a hole in the ground, I'll give you my background really quick. This is me, and that's a hole in the ground, so you can see there are a few differences. This is just a warning about my dry sense of humor you have to put up with for a little while. But I was raised in a Christian home, and you can tell that this is a Christian home. I believe the Bible from cover to cover, and I went to public schools all the way through high school. When I graduated, I went to a Christian college, John Brown University in Arkansas, to study mechanical engineering. Got a degree there, but then I became more interested in physics. They didn't have a physics major, so I left there, went back to Wisconsin, where I'm from, and went to the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater to get a degree in physics. That's when my world changed quite a bit, because at the Christian college, my engineering professors opened up every class in prayer. At the State University, my physics professors didn't do that. They were all evolutionists. Some of them were atheists, and they were telling me I was wrong about everything I believed. And that really shook me because I realized I know what I believe. I just don't know why. I couldn't defend it. So God put it in my heart to start looking into these things. So I have been looking into them and researching and lecturing for 37 years now on these topics. I founded the Starting Point Project, traveling around the country. I've been in 8 other countries as well. I've also been invited to be on the board of directors of Associates. It's the world's largest consortium of scientists who are creationists and Christians. The founding member is Dr. John Sanford. He's from Cornell University. He's famous for having invented something called the gene gun. Search genes into the DNA, and scientists all over the world use that. But he's a very godly man, very humble. Then there's Dr. John Baumgardner. He's a PhD geophysicist. He's built the world's best 3D computer simulation of plate tectonics. Just off the charts brilliant. He used to be in California. He actually moved to Lynchburg. He's working at Liberty now, so he's not far from here. And then there's 2 other board members and myself. And I always say, if these guys were here this morning, as smart as they are, and they're really, really smart, they would be the first to admit out of all 5 board members, I'm the tallest. So I like to brag about that a little bit. But I get to hang around these guys and take cutting edge stuff they're doing it and putting it into English for everyone else. But as I mentioned this morning, the world that we're living in today is just upside down. It's just crazy. The wheels have fallen off. There are so many things coming our way, and I'm not going to be going through all these things, but we know we're dealing with these different issues. And the point is that we shouldn't be arguing our philosophy versus someone else's. Whatever someone brings up, we should say, hold on a second, let me see what God's word says about that. And then we just share with them what's in there. If they have a problem with what we're sharing, it's not with us, it's with God's word. And then they'll be accountable for that someday. But we're just there to graciously help them understand, what did God say about these things, and why might they be seeing issues with them? Because it's not according to God's created order. So we need that starting point. We need Scripture to come up with a response to whatever it is. And this is just a short list here. That's why we need to know that we can trust God's word. So we're going to pare Christianity down as simple as humanly possible, and there are 2 major elements that it all goes down to. Number 1, that God exists, He created everything. And number 2, the Bible is the Word of God. Those are the 2 basic tenets. Everything else is a subtopic of one of these things. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to look at both of these. Evidence that God's the creator, and evidence that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. In fact, you guys saw apparently a preview of some of my talks, and you saw some of these elements, so you're going to see a repeat. Some of you may not have seen it. For those of you who did see it, it'll help you remember it more, because you probably don't remember it if you just saw it once. But the Bible certainly talks about these 2 elements. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. 2 Timothy 3:16, all Scripture is inspired by God. Those are the 2 things we're going to take a look at. And the central theme is you can trust the Bible from cover to cover. Everything that's in it is trustworthy. Why does any of this matter? If I don't address this question, everything else after this is just trivia. Here's why it matters. Because origin determines purpose. The origin of something determines its purpose. If I showed you this piece of equipment here and asked you what its purpose was, most of you would not know. But if you knew who the manufacturer was, the manufacturer could tell you what it is, why they made it, what its purpose is. It's actually called a proximity probe. It measures vibration in large industrial equipment. My first job out of college, I worked on these things. The point is the origin of that determines its purpose. It's the same thing with everyone here this morning. Your origin determines your purpose. If you think the universe came about through something like a Big Bang, the scientists who drafted this tell us there is no purpose for the Big Bang. It just happened. A lot of Christians say, well, God used the Big Bang. Someone had to start it. God is all powerful, and He could certainly do that. It's not about what God could do. It's about what He said He did. And the scientists who drafted this saying, get your God out of here. We don't need Him. The whole idea of this was to explain the origin of things apart from your God, apart from the supernatural. It's a whole other talk why the 2 really don't even go together. But they say there's no purpose for the Big Bang. There's no purpose for the origin of the universe. And if you're part of that universe, there's really no purpose for your life either. You can make one up. You want to save the spotted owl. Great. What does that do for you when you're laying on your deathbed? Nothing. Here's a quote from a scientist also from Cornell University. He said, "Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tell us loud and clear. And I must say that these are basically Darwin's views. There are no gods, no purposeful forces of any kind, no life after death. When I die, I'm absolutely certain I'm going to be completely dead. That's just all. That's going to be the end of me. There's no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no free will for humans either." Very depressing, but very consistent with an atheistic worldview. Everything's just an accident. There's no ultimate purpose. Here's a quote from Stephen Hawking. He was arguably the world's leading theoretical physicist. This is interesting. He said, "The human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet orbiting around a very average star in an outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. We are so insignificant that I can't believe the whole world exists for our benefit." We are each free to believe what we want, and it is my view that the simplest explanation is there is no God. No one created the universe, and no one directs our fate. This leads me to a profound realization. There is probably no heaven and no afterlife either. We have this one life to appreciate the grand design of the universe, and for that I am extremely grateful. This guy was incredibly intelligent, and I could say a lot about this. I'm just going to pull two things out really quick. Number one, he appreciates the grand design. How do you have design without a designer? That doesn't make any sense. Secondly, he's extremely grateful. To whom or what? To particles for banging together in a certain way so that now he can be here and appreciate other particles? It really doesn't make any sense. It's inconsistent with any kind of logic. So the Big Bang equals no purpose. On the other hand, if you think this universe was designed, then there would be a purpose for it. And if you're part of that universe, there would be a purpose for your life as well. I came up with this analogy. Let's say you walked into a room and you saw this cake sitting on a pedestal. You would instantly know somebody made that cake. You probably wouldn't even consciously think that, but you just know that. You could walk up to it closer, see how many layers there are, what kind of frosting they use. It would further confirm somebody made the cake. But you could look at those details all day long, and they would never tell you who made the cake, why they made the cake, what they want you to do with the cake, and what they want you to do when you're done doing whatever they want you to do with the cake. You can't learn that from the details. But if the baker of the cake left you a note, then you could know him. "Hi, my name is Susie. I made the cake for you. Have a piece," and then just walk away. "I'll clean up later." You could know that if the maker of the cake left you a note. It's the same thing with our universe. There's so much evidence that this universe and life is not an accident. But you could look at those details all day long, all life long, and they would never tell you who made the universe, why they made the universe, or what happens to you when you die. You can't get that from looking at dirt and DNA. But if the maker of the universe left you a note, you could know. And that's exactly what the Bible claims to be. It claims to be a note from the Creator saying, "Hello, I'm the one who did this. Here's why I did it. Here's what happened to it. Here's my plan for fixing it. And here's what happens to you when you die." We could know those things if the Creator of the universe left us a note. And that's what the Bible claims. Amen. Now, that's not proof that the Bible is the Word of God, but that's the claim it's making. And we will look into evidence that it actually is that too. It's not just claiming that, because I could write a book making those claims too. So we're going to start out first looking at creation itself and evidence for creation. We could have entire seminars and semesters at universities going over all these details. I got a half of one talk to discuss the origin of the universe, origin of life, and origin of species. So we're going to go fast. Origin of the universe. What's the standard story? The standard story is the Big Bang. The Big Bang is not a good scientific model for the origin of the universe. It is covered with Band-Aids on life support to keep it going. Why? Because they don't have anything to replace it with yet. But that gives you the impression, it's been proven because scientists have more and more evidence for it. No, they're propping it up because it's nothing to replace it with yet. As soon as they find something else, this is going to go away so fast it's going to make your head spin. That's part of another talk where I go into a lot of details, but just very briefly, back to Stephen Hawking, theoretical physicist. He had to address the issue of, getting something from nothing. There's no God, so how did we get this whole universe out of nothing? This is what he said. Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Now, most of you probably don't want to debate the world's leading theoretical physicist. But let's forget about how smart he was and just think about what he said. I'm going to reword this slightly. Because there is something, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Wait a minute, if you have something, you don't have nothing. And what was the something he talked about? The law of gravity. Okay, what is the law of gravity? It's not a physical thing that you can weigh and paint and bend. It's a description of how the universe operates. But you can't have a description of how the universe operates unless you have a universe to describe. But if you have a universe to describe, you're not creating it from nothing. It already exists. So here's an example of a statement from a truly brilliant scientist that makes no sense. Again, the Bible says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. There's a lot of smart, intelligent scientists, but they're not wise because they have no fear of God or they don't even believe in God. So, nothing created everything. This is science. This is what we teach in every public school system, every state university. Everything came from nothing, and they call that science. And if someone dares to say, well, I think something created everything, oh, thanks for bringing that up. See, now, that's a religious statement. And we're in school here. We're just here to talk about science. You have to leave your religion out of it. You can go to church if you want, but that's not really reality. Okay, we're thinking about this logically. Let's think it through further. Nothing created everything. It's never been observed. We've never seen nothing create anything, let alone an entire universe. And science is all about observations. And it goes against the known laws of science. It's the first law of thermodynamics, one of the best laws we have in science, says you can't get something out of nothing. They've never seen anything contradict that. And then thirdly, it's completely illogical. How could nothing do anything? Nothing is nothing but nothing. That's why we call it nothing. You know how they're trying to get around that? They're trying to redefine nothing. Lawrence Krauss, another theoretical physicist, said if nothing is full of stuff, then I'll go with that. I gotta not go into that talk right now, but it's just great. They'll just redefine words. But the idea that something created everything, that's been observed. We've seen something create something else. We've all created things. It's completely consistent with the laws of science, and it's completely logical that something could actually do something. So in reality, nothing created everything. That's more like a blind faith religion, where something created everything. That's consistent with everything we know about science. So, the origin of life. I told you we're moving fast. I give an entire talk on this. Stanley Miller, back in the 1950s, put this contraption together to try to simulate what he thought the Earth was like billions of years ago to see if it might show us how life formed. I got to skip all those details. We have time for one question. What are the chances? What are the chances that just somehow dead chemicals could come together just right to form a living cell? Sir Frederick Hoyle, he was one of the world's leading astronomers and mathematicians. He was an atheist for most of his life. He did these calculations. He told us the chances that this could happen by accident, and even all the billions of years they talk about, is one chance in... Now, before I give you the number, I have a question for you. What is your cutoff? What does that mean? It means this: if you find out the chances are less than 1 in some number, you are going to conclude there's no way that's an accident. No way. What's your number? If you don't have a number in mind, nothing I share is going to matter. You have to have some criteria that you're looking for. So for argument's sake, let's say you throw out a really big number. If it's less than 1 chance in 10 million billion, then you're going to say, okay, that's not an accident. That can't happen by itself. Okay, what was Sir Frederick Hoyle's number? He said 1 chance in 10 raised to the 40,000th power. That's a 1 with 40,000 zeros after it. Is this bigger than the massive number you brought up? A little bit. It's 10 million billion times 10 million billion times 10 million billion times 10 million billion. 2,500 times you have to multiply your number by itself to finally get his number. It's crazy, but you know what? At this point, in your minds, it's just a massive number. But you have no idea how really big that is. So another analogy. Most of you have probably played with a Rubik's Cube at some point. A Rubik's Cube has a lot of different combinations to it, and only one is correct. It has 10 million trillion different combinations. So if you were blindfolded and you're spinning it randomly, you have one chance in 10 million trillion of getting that thing right. No sane person says, yeah, I could do that. All right, let's compare solving this Rubik's Cube by accident to the big numbers Sir Frederick Hoyle gave us. It would be like me handing you the cube, putting the blindfold on, you start spinning it away randomly, and you solve that cube 2,105 times in a row, getting it right every single time. Is that even close to possible? No. So why do we teach in every public school system and every state university life formed 3.8 billion years ago when dead chemicals came together to form a living cell? I love that story. There's just no science behind it at all. Part of another talk, I got to keep moving. Herbert Yockey, an evolutionist, said the belief that life on Earth arose spontaneously from non-living matter is simply a matter of faith. It's like, wait a minute, scientists don't have faith. They're in the laboratory proving things, right? No, he's saying they have faith that happened a long time ago because they weren't there to see it happen. And not only is it a faith, it is a blind, unreasonable faith because it goes against everything that we really know from science. Getting to the third category of creation, the origin of species, the variety of creatures we have on the planet. And this is really tough to do in a small portion of a talk, but this is what I came up with. The big picture of the whole creation-evolution controversy can be whittled down to this. Evolution predicts and requires everything to be going uphill over time, getting more and more complex over millions and millions and millions of years. That's what we would expect if evolution is true. That's required. On the other hand, creation's just the opposite. Everything was created perfect, fully formed, but Adam's sin brought corruption and death in, and things have been going downhill ever since. Can you, in that creation scenario, still have a variety of animals? Yeah, you can have a great variety of dogs and different breeds and things like that. We don't argue with that at all. But overall, the trend is going to be going downhill genetically. That's what we would expect if creation is true. So let's take a look at what we actually see. Evolution teaches us 3.8 billion years ago, a single cell evolved from non-living chemicals and then turned itself into every other life form on this planet over millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years. Okay, what's the source of information? If you're going to take a single-celled organism and turn it all the way into a human beings are so much more complex than a single cell. So you got to add a lot of information to make those changes. Where does that information come from? This is just one angle out of many we could discuss. So let's think this through. Scientists generally talk about natural selection and mutations of what's driving evolution. So let's see if natural selection could provide all this information they would need. Well, natural selection, we call that survival of the fittest. And guess what? Natural selection truly does explain the survival of the fittest. It really does. But what it doesn't explain is the arrival of the fittest. How do we get creatures to begin with? It does a great job of explaining why things are dying out over time, but it never explains how you get new things. Natural selection absolutely cannot create anything new. It's just a good explanation of why some things are dying out. And scientists know that. They know this is not producing new information for them. So how about mutations? And they say, yep. I have quotes on this that say mutations are the only source of raw material for evolution to work. This is the only game in town. So one angle we're going to take a look at here, it's called the waiting time problem. Mutations are accidental copying errors. When creatures reproduce themselves, they take their complex DNA and make a copy and pass it on to the children. There's so much information there that they don't always copy it right. Mistakes happen every time. So they say these mistakes, they admit, yeah, most of them are bad, but once in a great while there's a good one. And then the good ones accumulate, and that's how you have evolution. Sounds real simple on the surface. There are many reasons why. In fact, just yesterday I gave a talk on DNA showing how it just can't happen. But skipping that, even if it could produce, random copying errors produce little positive changes over time, and then they needed to accumulate, how much time would you need? How long would you have to wait? And this is phenomenal. I'm going to have some numbers here, but I'll explain this. How long would you have to wait? Well, again, single-celled organism produces all these life forms here. We're not going to do the whole thing of evolution. We're going to focus in on just a small branch here of an ape-like creature evolving into chimps and also evolving into humans, because they believe that chimps and humans have a common ancestor starting here, that branched off into chimps, and the other branch went off into humans. And they tell us it took 6 million years to go from an ape-like creature to chimps and an ape-like creature to human beings. Well, what are the differences that have to be produced over that time? There are at least 300 million differences between chimps and humans today. This is very conservative. There's probably at least 600 million. So in 6 million years of history, they have to come up with 300 million changes over time. But there's not just changes. There are positive changes that are related to each other that could build together to build what you need that humans have that chimps don't. Anyone can make random changes, but no, these have to be really good, complex changes that can work together over time. So you got 6 million years to come up with 300 million positive related changes. Is that possible? Well, that's our target. That's what we need. Well, Dr. John Sanford, who invented the gene gun, and Dr. John Baumgardner, who did the plate tectonics thing, those two scientists and two other scientists came up with a software model that could mimic living things to answer these questions. So they used their software to ask, how long would it take to get 2 changes? Not 300 million, 2. 2 changes are like 2 rungs in the DNA. It doesn't do anything, but you got to start somewhere. 84 million years it would take to get these 2 positive related changes that could stay in the genome and get passed on and all that. There's a lot of details. 84 million years to get 2. Then they asked, how long would it take to get 8? 8 changes in the rungs, which are called nucleotides, 8 changes in the rungs on those ladders that are positive related changes is equivalent to producing like the English word yes. Does the English word yes create spines and spleens and nervous system? No, it's a simple little word. So how long would it take to get 8 changes? 18.5 billion years. That's older than they tell us the universe is. I don't buy into the billions of years, but in a time period older than the universe, they can only get 8 changes. So if we summarize this, we can give them 3,000 times the amount of time they're asking for, and they can only still come up with 0.000027% of what they need. It's not even close. This article has been published in a secular publication and been available for downloads. There's been over 10,000 downloads of this article that was written. How many scientists tried to refute it? 0. It's so powerful. Mutations can't produce that information. It's not going to happen. Every time we reproduce as humans, we're adding another 100 mistakes to our DNA. So my parents had a bunch of mistakes in their DNA. They copied all those mistakes, and then they added another 100, gave it to me. I took all my parents' mistakes, the 100 new they gave me, and added another 100, gave it to our kids, and they didn't even say thank you. That caused one Russian scientist to ask this question: why have we not died 100 times over? If we've been evolving for 6 million years and we keep adding these mistakes, our DNA shouldn't work anymore. And it really shouldn't. It's called error catastrophe. But if we've only been around thousands of years, we could handle the limited mutations that we actually do have. It's part of another talk. So mutations don't cut it. That's not going to work at all. Really quickly, the fossil record, I'm throwing this one in here. I mentioned that I do tours of the Grand Canyon. We have 2 dates that still have some openings. I'm doing 5 this year. 2 still have availability. It's really, really cool. We actually go around the river. We raft this famous horseshoe bend here on rafts. It was really tiny. It's about 1,100 feet down at this point. Smooth sailing. We also spend a day walking on the rim, looking 1 mile down to the Colorado River. Those of you who saw the flood talk, you know a lot about this. But a really easy trip. We take a bus. We just walk. We're not climbing up rocks or anything. And we talk all about the authority of Scripture, and we point out how this had to have been carved out by a catastrophic flood. We show you all the reasons. It's just a powerful trip. We also stop and see some dinosaur footprints, which are really, really cool. You can walk on them. We encourage people to step around them, but they're at an Indian reservation. We also have a photo op at the end of the trip where we take the whole group, put under this massive rock. It's really cool. Some people stay later. You can visit Antelope Canyon, which is in the same area. I took this picture on my phone when I was there with my sister and brother-in-law. We have a flyer on our table in the back there if you're interested for more information, but it's all about showing the authority of God's Word. You can trust everything, even that flood account. So that was the origin of the universe. Very quick, we're going to end with evidence for the inspiration of Scripture. How do we know the Bible is the inspired Word of God? this is important. Most people have an opinion about the Bible based on what somebody else told them. They know, for instance, it's filled with errors and contradictions. There's missing portions, extra portions, have been disproved by science, and on and on and on. Most skeptics don't really know any of that. Someone else told them those things, and like, yeah, I knew I didn't believe that Bible. And so then they will tell the Christians it's filled with errors and contradictions, and then the Christians often say, well, you just need to trust Jesus and have faith. It's like, whatever. And they walk away. But there are answers to all these things. There's so much evidence that the Bible is really written by God. I've had skeptics tell me this: there's no evidence that God wrote the Bible. And here's a response you can have very graciously if anyone says anything like that to you. So I've had people say that, no evidence God wrote the Bible. I ask them a question. Say, okay, tell me, what would you accept as evidence that God wrote the Bible? What would that look like in your mind if you saw A, B, or C? That would definitely be evidence that God wrote the Bible. Well, I don't know, but I know there's no evidence. It's like, wait a minute, if by your own admission you don't even know what the evidence would look like, how do you know it doesn't exist? In fact, if you don't have criteria that you use to judge what counts and what doesn't, we can't even have this conversation. So get people to realize they're making a lot of bold claims with nothing to back it up. I think there's a lot of evidence that God wrote the Bible. In fact, if God did write a book, what would we expect to see? Well, personally, I'd expect to see at least 4 things. I'd expect it to be internally consistent, that it wouldn't contradict itself. If it did, that's good evidence God didn't write that. I would expect it to be historically accurate. If it gets history wrong, it's good evidence God didn't write that. He would know history. I would expect it to be prophetically accurate. If it makes predictions about the future and they don't come true, that's pretty good evidence God didn't write that because he would know the future. And then lastly, scientific accuracy. If the book you're looking at makes statements that can be tested by science and it's been proven false, and we can all see that, probably pretty good evidence God didn't write that because God would know science. Well, we have evidence for every one of these things, and I'm going to really quickly touch on 3 of these 4. And again, you may have seen a preview of some of these things. First of all, internal consistency. What does that mean? An analogy will help you understand this. Let's say there's 2 guys. Here's their background. They're both born and raised in Dallas, Texas. They're 72 years old. They both have PhDs in U.S. history. They're professors of U.S. history. They teach at the same university, and English is their native language. These guys are basically identical. You ask these guys to write a 300-page research paper on one controversial topic, the assassination of JFK, an event that happened in their city while they were around, and they're experts in U.S. history. Will these 2 guys agree in every detail they write? Not hardly. But that's just one controversial topic written about by 2 guys who were alive, and it happened in their city, and they're experts in those areas, but they won't even agree with each other. You compare that to the Bible. The Bible has at least 40 different authors written over a 1,600-year period in 3 different languages on 3 different continents. The authors had all different backgrounds, and they're writing in different settings, and they don't just talk about one controversial topic. They cover hundreds of controversial topics, and yet they're all in perfect agreement with each other. How is that possible unless God is actually inspiring every one of those writers? Quickly, prophetic accuracy. You remember Yogi Berra? He just said so many crazy things. I love his sayings. This is one of my favorites. He said it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. That's a yogiism. It's kind of funny. But the prophetic content of the Bible, there are over 8,000 prophetic passages in the Bible, making 1,800 predictions, covering over 700 topics. That makes the Bible fully 27% prophetic in nature. 27% of the Bible is predictive. You won't find any other book out there on the planet even close to that. Why? Because it's so easy to be wrong. You'll guess a few things, but the rest you're just going to be off. But the Bible has 100% accuracy track record. Here's just one example, the city of Tyre. You've probably heard of that. If you find Israel here and then go north in Lebanon here, there's the city of Tyre right on the Mediterranean coast. This city is one of the most ancient and prosperous cities in history. What did the Bible say about it? I'm going to give you just the highlights. We're not going to have time to go read entire passages, but in Ezekiel chapter 26, it talks about Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, attacking them from the north. So specifically names the king from the north, would attack the city of Tyre. Guess what happened in history? Nebuchadnezzar attacked the city from the north. That was right. Then it says many nations would come up against the city of Tyre, not just Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, but many nations did attack the city of Tyre, including all of these things here. We know that documented from history. The Bible was right. Then it said, I will scrape her dust from her, make her like the top of a rock, flat. Goes on to say, they shall lay thy stones and timbers and thy dust in the midst of the water. So knock everything down and throw it into the sea. That's crazy. Yeah, go in, kill people, destroy some buildings, set some things on fire, and you're done. Why would you take all the time and energy to then throw all that in the sea? It makes no sense whatsoever. But guess what happened? The debris was scraped, thrown into the sea, and the city was scraped flat. How did that happen? Well, Alexander the Great wanted to attack the people in the city of Tyre, but many had escaped to a nearby island. He couldn't build big enough ships to go out there and attack them, so he took all the debris from the city and he built a bridge, or they call it a mole, to get over to the island to attack the people. And today, if you look at a Google Earth shot of this, sediments have built that area up, so now it's actually, that island is actually connected to the mainland, but that's because of Alexander the Great. It's exactly what happened in history, predicted by the Bible. It goes on to say it shall never be built again, never be found again or reestablished. And it hasn't. It's a perfect place for a city right on the coast there, but it hasn't been rebuilt. Columbia Encyclopedia says the principal ruins of the city today are those of buildings erected by the Crusaders. There are some Greco-Roman remains, but any left by the Phoenicians, people from Tyre, lie underneath the present town. They're buried there. It's never rebuilt, never found again. So the Bible said, and that's what happened. Even though it's in a perfect spot, all an atheist would have to do is go rebuild the city of Tyre right where it used to be. They would disprove the Bible. I have a funny feeling that if they tried, they wouldn't be successful. But the Bible was 100% accurate, even though the prophecy was just kind of bizarre. And that's just one example. We're going to finish with scientific accuracy. You saw a little preview of some of this. It's one of my favorites. But again, people say no real scientist believes the Bible. Well, the truth is, most major areas of science we have today were founded by Bible-believing Christians. If you'd like a few examples, I brought a few along. Antiseptic surgery, bacteriology, calculus, chemistry, computer science, electronics, electrodynamics, electromagnetics, fluid mechanics, galactic astronomy, gas dynamics, genetics, hydraulics, hydrostatics, oceanography, optical mineralogy, paleontology, pathology, physical astronomy, stratigraphy, thermodynamics, thermokinetics, vertebrate paleontology, and a scientific method, all founded by Bible-believing Christians. Anybody who says no real scientist believes the Bible, they don't only not understand science, they don't know history. This is where science came from. It was birthed out of the Christian community. Real quick example, Exodus 15:26, and I think this was in the preview. If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, I will put none of these diseases upon thee. What's going on here? Backdrop, God creates everything that's perfect. Adam and Eve sin, that brings death and a curse into God's perfect creation. God could have just smashed them and started over, but he says, no, I love you too much. I got a plan. I'm going to send my own son to die on a cross to pay for the sins of the world. And the rest of the Old Testament is God playing out that plan, which included God choosing a group of people through which his son, the Messiah, would be born. He chose the Hebrew people who became the Israelites and the Jews, God's chosen people. The Old Testament is also Satan, who hates God, trying to ruin God's plan. Satan's trying to wipe out the Jews because if he can, the Messiah can't come. So the entire Old Testament is God trying to protect his people as Satan's trying to wipe them out. In this passage, Moses is saying, listen to the health practices that God is giving us, and we won't see the diseases that are affecting the nations around us. But we know from the book of Acts that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He went to Egypt U. Today, if someone goes to a state university, get a PhD, and then they write some books, you would expect that a lot of the information in those books would come from what they learned at the university. It's just kind of how it works. Moses goes to Egypt U, graduates, and then he writes 5 books. The first 5 books of the Bible. So do we see Egyptian wisdom in the Bible? We should, because that's Moses' background. Here's an example of Egyptian wisdom. The Ebers Papyrus, written in 1550 BC, contains over 800 magical formulas and remedies, one of which is if you got a splinter, you're supposed to apply worm blood and donkey dung. Modern scientists say, yikes, you don't want to do that. It causes tetanus spores, you can get lockjaw, you can get really sick, you could die. That's the kind of stuff Moses was educated in. So do we see stuff like that in the Bible? Here's an example of what we do see. This is Moses talking about touching a dead body. Now, today we know about bacteria and germ theory, especially with COVID. Moses wrote this a long time ago in Numbers chapter 19. Whoever touches the dead body of anyone will be unclean for 7 days. He must wash themselves in the water of purification on the third and the seventh day, and then he'll be clean. Okay, well, what's this water of purification? Moses tells us. He said the priest is to take some cedar wood, hyssop, scarlet wool, and throw them on the burning heifer or cow. That sounds bizarre. Most of you are old enough to remember the Beverly Hillbillies. It sounds like something Granny would come up with in the kitchen, put some possum in there and stir it around. She was always doing weird things. That's what this sounds like. But modern scientists say, no, that's not weird at all. That's really interesting, and here's why. The cedar wood and the burning heifer ashes combine to make lye. That's a caustic soda. That's soap. You touch a dead body, washing with soap would be a good thing. The hyssop plant gets converted into thiamol. That's isopropyl alcohol. It kills bacteria. Touch a dead body, killing bacteria would come in handy. The scarlet wool forms a gritty substance like an SOS pad in your kitchen or orange goop. It has pumice in it. It's abrasive. It helps get the grease out. Same thing with the scarlet wool. Applying it on the third and the seventh day, bacteria grow very well in a damp environment. So you want to wait a few days for it to dry out. You apply this, wait a few more days, apply it a second time, and you're considered clean. Modern scientists say this is a great natural remedy if you don't have antibiotics that we create today. Did Moses know anything about germ theory and bacteria and isopropyl alcohol? Obviously not. This is evidence that God said, hey, Mo, I want you to write some things down. So he writes it down, and then Moses said, that was awesome. You got anything else? And God says, yeah, I got another one. Here's one more. So we'll end with this. Jewish tradition that Moses brought up in Genesis 17. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised. Why did Moses say the 8th day? Could have said the 3rd month, the 5th year. Could have said anything, but he said the 8th day. Well, modern scientists have discovered some fascinating things about blood clotting. There are 2 major elements in your bloodstream that are necessary to clot your blood. We have vitamin K and prothrombin. On a molecular level, we have about 24 events that have to occur in proper sequence to clot your blood. You miss one of them, your blood doesn't clot, you bleed to death. So how did that evolve over hundreds of millions of years by accident where some creature had event A, that's all it had? It can't clot its blood, it can't survive. What if it had A, B, and C? Still doesn't do it. A, B, C, D, E, F, G doesn't do it. A, B, C, D, F, G, R, R, W, T. No, it's got to be all 24 in proper sequence. That can't evolve slowly over time. But on the larger level, we have vitamin K and prothrombin. Vitamin K, they discovered, develops in a baby somewhere between days 5 and 7. That's where it kicks in. Prothrombin looks like this if we graph it, and I will explain the graph. The line across the top is a normal level of prothrombin in your body. Numbers across the bottom are days after birth. They've discovered that a baby on day 1 has about 90% of its prothrombin. That's pretty high. That's not bad. But then it drops dangerously low between days 2 and 5, down to only 30%. Not good at all. On day 8, it spikes to 110% of its normal level. It will never be that high again the rest of your entire life. So if you are a baby and you need a surgical procedure, the perfect day would be day 8 because for sure you have vitamin K and you have more prothrombin than you'll ever have the rest of your life. Did Moses know anything about vitamin K and prothrombin? Obviously not. This is evidence God said, Mo, write it down. He writes it down. And we're just scratching the surface